All right. Hi, everyone. Okay. Welcome. So, week 10, there is 2 weeks after this to go. The last week of the lectures this semester will be revision. I will give half an hour, 20 minutes on bringing all together some of the key ratios that we've talked about this semester. I'll go through a topic-by-topic summary, and then I will talk to you about the content of the exam and arrangements for exam period and consults and things like that, and suggest how you might study for it. And you will walk away from that last week with a question-by-question breakdown of the topics on the exam. All right? Now, winding that back a little bit, and forgive me, my groups today that I've worked with so far, because they've heard this before, you now know it's official, you now know the date of the exam. It's right towards the end of the exam period, which is not great for either of us, you guys or me, but that's okay, that's what we're given and that's what we'll do, and we'll do it well. All right? Now, all I'd suggest you do, though, is try and spread out your study, because a lot of you that I work with, you're at varying levels of your extent of understanding, and that's fine, and that's completely as predicted. However, we are getting not a lot of people coming to see us in consults or outside. I mean, I will organise appointments regardless, it doesn't matter. I've got consultation hours, but rarely do they work for everyone. And so I'm seeing people all, here and there all the way through the week. But we are here for you. All right? We're here to help you. And if you leave it until the last few days before the exam, this subject and some of the other sort of introductory subjects in your masters, they're well known for having lots and lots of people want to come last couple of days before the exam. And I know that's most convenient because you guys might have got all your exams over and done with and all that. But it's hard to get one-on-one time that you need and that you might like in the last couple of days of the exam when there's 30 other people in the consult. Okay? So spread it out, get in early. It's like voting, right? Vote early and vote often. Come and see us early. We will help you kind of absorb this stuff because it's inherently difficult to absorb it in the last, in the final few days before the exam anyway. We are here to help you get as good a mark as you possibly can, okay? And good an understanding of the material as you possibly can. Okay, so today there's a change of tack. There's a change of topic. We've finished the financial reporting. We're now into the management accounting type topics. It's a little bit of a change of emphasis, and while I've tried to make the case for how and why information in the subject is relevant to you regardless of your major, I think I can make the case really strongly now in the last few topics, because to an extent it brings a lot of what we've been doing together. But we'll see if I can convince you. So basically an introduction to management accounting. So there's 2 parts to the session. One, I'm going to make the general case, background, financial versus managerial accounting. And the second part will be going through a specific technique in managerial accounting, which is really quite simple to use, fairly simple to get your heads around, but pretty useful in terms of decision making within certain firms. Learning objectives for the first part, well, 3 out of 4. Really new and important. I mean, I'm going to talk about the importance of cost information, but we're sort of going to, that's relevant and it's important, but I'm going to cover that again in the second half. So I'm just going to touch on it for now and then cover it again in a little bit more detail. So explain the distinguishing features. I've got a couple of tables. That'll be enough, but just be able to mount an argument as to why and how management accounting information is different to financial accounting information. It all comes out of the same source. Right? The accounting information system, we extract it and we just use it for different purposes. Okay? 3 broad functions of management. I don't want to cut across what the management guys, many of you guys are doing management and marketing subjects. But at a really crude level, I want to try and locate accounting's role in each of the core functions that management do. All right? And I think we can do it fairly easily. Cost information is an important part of accounting information that is used by managers, not the only part. But I'll point to you I'll point out to you as well a few contemporary developments that really make a strong case for why you as managers, either now or in the future, need to have at your fingertips multiple sources of information, not just accounting, right? Not for 1 second just accounting, but being able to draw on different pieces and types of, and sources of information to be able to inform your decisions is absolutely crucial for a number of reasons, and I'll talk to you more about that. We'll sort of make it a bit of fun as we go. All right, so where do we start? So the first takeaway, I guess, is that management accounting information provides financial and non-financial information for those inside the firm. So that's the first point. Right? So regardless of the type of business, the sector you're in, etc. So service, manufacturing, merchandising, what to sell, where to sell it, and how. Okay, some of you have heard those really annoying ads on the radio about the importance of advertising on the radio. Guy with a really raspy, annoying voice. No? Anyway, I may have been the only one that's heard them. They're talking about the reach of radio as a marketing tool, and they're talking about all sorts of things. Many of those decisions will have an element of cost to them. And in trading off the benefits of undertaking a particular investment, whether or not it be marketing or capital investment or sustainability, etc., part of the trade-off is the benefits to be undertaken by the investment versus the cost. Okay? How do we know whether we're in a position to respond to a competitor's decision? So think about the more competitive industries that you know. So they might include the airline industry, for example, or retail, or hotel, or hospitality. So when one organisation in that field tends to go low with a price, then others are faced with the decision as to whether to match or not. Part of that input is cost. Proprietorships, partnerships, companies, etc., regardless of size. Smaller companies, a lot of the information needs for smaller companies is what do they have to do to gear up in order to grow up. In other words, open themselves up to venture capital, open themselves up to heavy finance, maybe a public offer, initial public offer, etc. Part of that involves getting their corporate governance and their reporting and their accounting information and being able to demonstrate sustainable financial returns. And also profit-making versus not-for-profit or non-profit. We know the importance of information for profit-seeking firms, but some of you may be doing this already, but if you're not, you may be considering in future years getting involved with not-for-profits or charities. Right? And one of the key distinguishing features of charities is that they haven't got a profit motive as part of their core operations. That doesn't mean that they can't make a surplus in any particular year, but they just can't distribute it. And that's okay, but one of the things that many of you will look for is the amount of their expenses they pay to other than the core function that they raise money for. Right? And you can see that in the accounting reports. So one high-profile sort of charity that's come to grief in recent years is the Shane Warne Foundation. Right? Was raising money for a wonderful cause. Public information would indicate that a smaller portion of the money raised was going to the cause. Now that's one input that people use to criticise that charity. There are other inputs in terms of efficiency and overall impact and things like that. My point being that accounting information is just as important for non-profits and charities as it is for companies, regardless of size. Okay? So how does financial accounting and managerial accounting differ? Well, I'm not going to labour on each of those points, but let me just make a few things, a few points by way of drawing distinctions. So financial accounting, so if you think about the accounting information system, all the transactions are recorded, all the information goes in there, it's just different types of information is extracted at different points. So financial accounting information, you typically the core function, and in many organisations, the financial accountant is often the same person as the managerial accountant. Okay? So financial accounting reports, they're standardised, profit and loss statement, balance sheet, cash flow statement. They're classified, they're historical, etc. Whereas the management, if you're in an organisation, the last thing you want to do is wait to 6 months or 12 months to get information about your firm. You want information weekly or fortnightly or daily even, maybe even hourly. Things like stock levels or things like turnovers or things like costing reports or cash flow data or sales, things like that. So you get a feel for the managerial accounting reports are internal type reports. They're probably produced on demand. You might have a standing order for a daily stock level report. If you are involved with purchasing stock, whenever a stock item gets below a certain level, you will get an automatic report probably emailed to you. All right? It's not particularly formatted, it's not aggregated, it's more specific. It's on demand. Right? The key for managerial accounting information is relevance, like timeliness, if you like, whereas the financial reports are delayed. So try and build up a kind of a number of bases on which financial and managerial accounting differ. So that's not to say, though, that some stakeholders within an organisation can't use financial accounting information as well, and they can. So gross profit would be one. Expense levels would be useful for those inside the firm as well as those outside the firm. But just know that financial accounting information is produced in accordance with accounting standards and is more standardised and is more kind of for external parties, those outside the firm, whereas managerial accounting is a little bit more agile, a little bit more specific. It's not formatted, it's not audited. All right? So just have a read up on that section as a background. So if at a sort of a crude level, if we thought about the functions, the key functions of managers, what would they be? So I'll put to you, and again, this is really quite crude or basic, but if we thought about managers as engaging in three general sorts of tasks. So there's planning, so there's looking ahead, forming a strategy and plotting a path in order to achieve that strategy. Then you make some decisions, so you put the plan in place and then you make some decisions and you buy some things and you try and sell things and you hire staff and you buy some infrastructure, etc. And you set targets for people and you try and get them to perform in certain ways. And at the end of the period or at certain times throughout the period, you make some attempt to try and measure the performance that's going on and you compare it to your actual target. Okay? So if I wind that back a little bit and think about the role of accounting information in each of those three levels, while planning, the obvious mechanism that accounting can contribute to the planning process is the budget. So I know a number of my contemporaries in industry and in the profession would spend 3 months plus each year budgeting. Now, to me that seems a little long, but it is the reality. A lot of organisations spend several months per year budgeting. And then there's another month and a half at various times throughout the year reporting against budget. Right? So, there's a real trade-off between spending a lot of time budgeting and doing the necessary due diligence in terms of your planning and not spending too much time planning and not enough time doing, if you like. So budgeting is key. Directing and motivating, so in other words, making decisions and measuring the implications of those decisions. Some of the implications of those decisions will be identified and articulated in dollar terms, so cost and revenues and turnovers and things like that. So accounting reports and recording is crucial. And then making decisions to analyse behaviour and taking action, whatever that may be. So what I'm going to talk to you next week when we talk about budgeting is, you compare your actual to your budget and then you explore reasons for the differences if there are any. If you're working in an organisation or an environment within an organisation where you're criticised across the board for not achieving your budget, then that's not likely to be as productive as what it might otherwise be. But if, on the other hand, you work in a situation where there's a discussion around, once you know your actual and you compare it to your budget, and there's a discussion around whether the budget was a little bit, whether the budget targets were appropriate and or whether your performance was appropriate and what needs to be done on either side, then that's a lot more productive a type of conversation. The point being, though, that in a case that if you think about the three broad objectives that managers might, or three broad roles that managers might undertake, accounting information is a crucial input to each of those roles. Drilling down on the idea of control just a little bit, and I just want to focus a little bit on cost now, just for a few slides, and that's all. But drilling down on the idea of control a little bit. So regardless of the setting, if I got you to think a little bit about what I mean, what you think about when I say the term control. So it is constraining someone in doing something, or regulating, or providing parameters, something like that, right? So if you think about how that looks in an organisation and the growth or the development of a lot of organisations, you might start off as a sole practitioner. You have a good idea, you do things really well, and all of a sudden you reach a point where you're at your capacity. And so you decide to hire someone, and that's okay. And if you work together, you can probably, keep an eye on them. You can personally observe them and ask questions and evaluate their actions. But what about if you hire more people and more locations? You need some sort of way to make sure that they are fully aware of what the strategies of the organisation are, and fully aware of where the nature and limits of their behaviour and their efforts should be directed, and what the notion of good performance or bad performance is. And all of those things require information. Right? And part of the way to define some of those is through accounting information. Again, not the only way, but part of the way. So the larger the organisations are, the more crucial the information flow becomes as a means of control. Things like budgets, things like performance evaluation reports, and a crucial part of that is cost information. Okay? So, just drilling down on cost a little bit. All right, now I don't want to, some of the accountants get a bad rap, or get a bad reputation as cost, wanting to minimise cost all the time. And I'm not talking about minimising cost here. I'm talking about managing costs. So sometimes you've got to spend money to make money. For example, it's wrapping things like transparency and due diligence around how you think about what costs you're incurring and what costs you might need to incur in the coming months and years. Right? So what management do, if you're running an organisation, or you think about the person who is running your organisation, what do they want? They're going to want information that's reliable and relevant, and where that relates to cost, they're going to need it to sort of inform decisions like what costs are involved in making a product. If we double production, what will happen to costs? Should we undertake this particular special order? What happens if our customers go and drop their prices? Can we match them? What if our volume increases? What if our volume decreases? Costs don't always change in direct proportion if our volume increases or decreases. What actually drives our costs? All right? Should we bid again? Should we bid for a major event coming up? I read the other day in the paper that a lot of countries and cities now around the world are dropping out of bidding for things like the Olympic Games and the Commonwealth Games, because a lot of those cities are just simply concluding that the cost involved with holding those major events is just way too high. And if you think about it, for many, many years, decades in fact, cities around the world have justified their effort and interest in that, holding those sort of events according to things like, the PR and the branding for the city and the country is unbelievable, and it brings tourism, etc. It's very difficult to observe the benefits of holding a major event like that, but it is less difficult to observe the costs, and maybe it's not necessarily the cost and benefit trade-off that is turning a lot of these cities off, but I just wonder whether it's the fact that the costs are easier to see than the benefits. This comes up every year, and I think I can safely say this now because you guys have all done your assignments, right? But this comes up every year when major events in Victoria are held, like the Grand Prix, for example, because the Grand Prix Formula One Grand Prix at the start of the year, well, just a few weeks ago really, cost the state government of Victoria a lot of money. Right? And we can see that it costs a lot of money, but somewhere, someone with power has decided that it's still worth pursuing, even though the cost is probably going up. It's an interesting dynamic. But cost is a crucial one. I put there, what impact will automation have on total costs? Especially in the manufacturing industry, that's something that managers and CEOs are toying with at the moment, right? So manufacturing technology is to the point where a lot of this can be automated. Not all of it, but a lot of it, particularly motor vehicles and other construction settings and engineering settings. Does that mean, for example, that you should get rid of half your staff or 3/4 of your staff? It's a real trade-off, right? One might be cheaper than the other, but it is a trade-off. Lots and lots of different ways to think about costs, and I'm just going to run you through 5 minutes of it, and then we're going to move on. All right, so if you think about the most complex setting for costs is probably a manufacturing organisation. So think about manufacturing something, let's call it computers. All right, so we make information technology. So under the same factory, we're going to make computers and we're going to make laptops. So we make PCs, laptops and screens. Okay, so we've got a couple of different products that we're making. The reason I make them different, it will become relevant to you, will become obvious to you in a minute. So major manufacturing cost classification. So a lot of manufacturing firms think about their cost in terms of direct materials and direct labour and indirect materials and labour, which is overhead. Okay, so why do I think about it like that? I made a slight change to your slides. I think this heading said here, direct materials maybe. If you just cross out direct, because it sort of makes more sense to just call it materials. So if you think about materials, so materials can be direct or indirect. So the direct materials are ones that you can see going from your inventory into making something. So the wiring, the plastic, the glass, the metal casing, the screws that go into the computer are direct materials. Okay? What else have I said? Flour for bread, steel for cars, cloth for shirts, plastic for toys. Okay? There are going to be other materials that are used in the production process, but just might not be traceable to a particular good. So this is when I was saying that we make screens and laptops and PCs under the same roof. Then if you were the PC man or lady and you were in charge of that product and someone else was in charge of the laptops and someone else was in charge of the screens, you want to make sure that you have a really clear idea as to the profitability of your product line. Because you probably get a bonus on that, right? So you don't want any costs incurred against your product that you didn't incur, right? Problem being with indirect materials is that it's difficult. So these are relevant to the production process but not specifically traceable. So it could be repairs and maintenance expense, it could be oil for the machinery, it could be depreciation on the floor, or floorboards in the factory, things like that, right? And they get allocated across the different products. All right, so relevant to production, but not specifically relevant to any one product. So therefore, management has a formula for spreading it over the different products. And we'll talk more about that if you do subsequent studies in accounting. Same thing with labour, right? So you might have people that sit there at desks or sit there at machines and actually put these babies together. So direct labour, right? We know that for every hour I spend working for the organisation, my job is to screw the backs on these screens. Okay? I'm being pretty simplistic, right? But it's a good job. And so I know that's direct labour. I know that would be included in the cost of inventory of those screens that's made. But what about the supervisor? What about the maintenance crew? All right? We know that if the one supervisor is responsible for all of those three products, then a lot of organisations would just simply allocate a third of her wage to each of those products. Okay? But you think about it, what happens if one product is a little bit more problematic than the rest? So you make PCs. PCs probably cost twice as much as a screen. I mean, on average, right? So if they cost twice as much as a screen and they're more complex, maybe the supervisor spends more time supervising that particular production. So therefore more of the cost should be allocated to that product. That's the way managers need to think. But in order to be able to think like this, you need the background and the information about costs. Another setting where that's really, really kind of relevant is in the home construction. So a lot of what these builders do is they have a core group of staff and then they have subcontractors that might work across different jobs. Right? And so if one builder is building 3 or 4 houses at a time, they might have a skeleton crew at each of the houses. And then depending on, and then they have these casual labour or subcontractors. So when the subcontractor finishes at one house, the boss might say, I'll go over to the other house and help them out. When they go over to the other house, they've got to write on the job card or write somewhere that's where they were working on that particular day. So the boss can allocate the cost of that day's wages to that particular house or to that particular construction. Because without a clear idea of costs, you can't make judgments like should we produce more or should we produce less or what our product mix should be. Okay, so manufacturing overhead, indirect costs, indirect materials, labour, depreciation, etc., etc. So why am I talking about this? Well, I'm talking about these type of costs because a crucial distinction that manufacturing organisations will make is what cost do you associate with inventory and what cost do you associate just with the period, right? So anything that's to do with manufacturing will be included as a product cost, right? Debit inventory, credit cash or credit, whatever we're using. Whereas other costs that aren't directly associated with a product become part of a period cost. So for example, right, period costs, things like admin expenses and selling expenses, they're below the line. Product costs become part of cost of inventory and then eventually cost of sales and directly affect gross profit. All right? So if you haven't got a clear idea as to what your selling expenses are or what your admin expenses are, you might be including some of those in your product cost and therefore you've got a skewed understanding of your gross profit. And then you're not in a position to make the sort of judgments and decisions that I was talking about. Okay. That finishes our conversation of costs, our discussion of costs for now, which I'm sure you're all pleased about. Let me talk about some other developments, though, that mean, a theme so far, whether you buy it or not, a theme so far is that the management have the need for multiple sources of information. Right? This is made even more, important in recent years, given a number of different developments. And I'll just run you through some of them. I won't talk about a whole bunch of them, but I'll just run you through some of them. I think it's safe to say, I've got 3 young kids, as I've probably said before, and the sort of information that these kids have access to now is way more than ever before. There's lots and lots of different types of businesses emerging. There's lots and lots of opportunities. There's lots and lots of capacity for storing and using information in decisions. That's it at a kind of a secondary school level. If you map that into the organisational level, talk about things like big data and international competition, etc. There's more pressure than ever before for executives and you guys to be across the different sources of information. Let me just talk about some of these now. I don't want to get too kind of, innovative and airy-fairy, but some of it's, seriously interesting stuff. It's all interesting stuff, right? I didn't mean to say some. So if you think about service industry needs, so there are service industries popping up everywhere, service firms, right? So you can even outsource your dishes. You have a meal and you can call an organisation, they come and pick up your dishes. How good is that, right? Your dirty dishes of a night. So anyway, I thought it was a good idea. So a lot of organisations in the service industry are more labour intensive, right? So there's more labour costs for many of these organisations as a portion of total costs. That's okay. For that though, there's a very clear need for a clear understanding of efficiency and productivity. Okay, 60%. A rule of thumb is that 60% of the jobs that will be available in 10 years' time have not yet been invented. Okay? Now, if I think about a whole bunch of the jobs that I can see people doing today, 10 years ago they probably weren't invented either. So it's not about, I don't want to scare anyone. It's all about, we don't know what jobs, or you probably don't, some of you may, but you probably don't know the full extent of the jobs you're going to have throughout your career. What the idea, the best, probably the best approach to use then is to try and equip yourself with being able to develop as many skills as possible, but use as much diverse information to influence your decision making in a range of contexts. Right? A couple of examples. Well, one example, say Domino's, right? I don't want to talk about pizzas given that we're probably about 6 o'clock and it's nearly dinner time. But I think on many levels, Domino's seems to be overtaking some of the other big guys in the industry, right? They've recently, I was reading the other day, they've recently undertaken a 3 and 10 project. Does anyone know anything about that? So it's either coming or it's just come, and that is that they make an undertaking to make a pizza available for pickup within 3 minutes, right? And available for delivery within 10. Okay, now you say, oh, well, that's okay. I go there and I want my pizza and I want it now. But you think about the sorts of things that they need to line up to get in place to make that come true. Right? Now, don't barge into your Domino's tomorrow and look for a pizza within 3 minutes, right? So I'm a bit hazy on whether it's actually here or whether it's the next project, okay? So don't say, Melbourne, you said, all right. But hey, if you can get it in 3 minutes, go for your life. But think about, there's all sorts of things about preparation and also, do we have to bring our people in early? What are the risks associated with that? If we budget on, 50 pizzas a night at 3 minutes, we've got to do some prep, right? So what happens if we don't get the orders? Does that mean we waste the food? I don't know. There's a bunch of things that need to be right for us to do that. So we need to think about, or that organisation is thinking about efficiency and productivity in different ways. Okay? 3 minutes for a pizza. That's very cool. Anyway, I get sidetracked. Globalisation, international competition. We are more competitive globally than ever before. Has anyone bought anything recently online from overseas? I'm not going to ask you what you bought. All right. So there's a few sneaky hands up going, yeah, all right, yeah, I have. Okay. But the thing being though is quite often you can buy stuff from overseas and it gets delivered to your front door, and it's often cheaper or just as cheap as buying it round the precinct, okay, or in the CBD. Now, there's good and bads, and we all want to say support the local businesses and things like that. But where it's significantly cheaper, it's difficult, okay? It's difficult, and I make no judgment. My point being that organisations that operate in different countries are subject to competition more so than ever before. Not only that, but you need to have enough information about what the costs and benefits are in operating in each of those countries and what potential exchange rates, etc. Again, more information. Technological change. Computer integrated manufacturing, that's what I was talking about before, sort of robotics, etc., increased automation. Scientific discoveries. Development of new technologies. Anyone ever heard of Amazon Go? Right? I saw this today. Have a look at this. It's cool.
4 years ago, we started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go? What if we could weave the most advanced machine learning, computer vision, and AI into the very fabric of a store so you never have to wait in line? No lines, no checkouts, no registers.
Okay, hang on, stop.
What would shop... Welcome to Amazon Go.
Did you make sense of that? All right, we try again. Here we go.
4 years ago, we started to wonder, what would shopping look like if you could walk into a store, grab what you want, and just go? What if we could weave the most advanced machine learning, computer vision, and AI into the very fabric of a store so you never have to wait in line? No lines, no checkouts, no registers. Welcome to Amazon Go. Use the Amazon Go app to enter. Then put away your phone and start shopping. It's really that simple. Take whatever you like. Anything you pick up is automatically added to your virtual cart. If you change your mind about that cupcake, just put it back. Our technology will update your virtual cart automatically. So, how does it work? We used computer vision, deep learning algorithms, and sensor fusion, much like you'd find in self-driving cars. We call it Just Walk Out technology. Once you've got everything you want, you can just go. When you leave, our Just Walk Out technology adds up your virtual cart and charges your Amazon account. Your receipt is sent straight to the app, and you can keep going. Amazon Go. No lines, no checkout. No, seriously.
There you go. Who feels like cheesecake now? My point being, so these guys are coming to Australia, right? Now, who knows when, plans are in place for them to come to Australia. So you think about that technology, and you've got to love their kind of voiceover when they say, oh, you know, it's the same technology as the driverless cars. I haven't seen a driverless car. So, but that's okay. So, think about the upfront investment that's required for something like that. You need, you know, part of it's R&D, yeah, and organisations get a little bit of a free kick in terms of there's a tax write-off for research and development expense and things like that. But it's really important to know the nature and limits of the amount you could expend and maybe should expend in exploring something like that. Right? Because I don't know, you know, shopping with kids as well, you know, they tend to kind of pick stuff up and can see how nasty that'd get. You know, other things like that Kaufland, the big German supermarket, Aldi arrived sort of 10 or so years ago. There's more competition than ever before for even the big end of town, not to mention, you know, smaller businesses, etc., which is really making the need for more information just crucial. You hear a lot of people talk about big data. Right? Now, I don't know how many of you know what big data is, but it's essentially just using large databases to look for trends and patterns in behaviours to enable you to kind of predict certain behaviours and future customer tastes right through to understanding the drivers of particular decisions people make. Okay? So, you know, now that is being used in so many industries, you know, I couldn't even begin to imagine things like medical, education, insurance, government, traffic flow. Anyone ever gone to a, you know, driving along the road and you're just about to merge into a highway and all of a sudden these temporary lights come and tell you to stop and there's no one anywhere, right? Part of the reason is based on large data, you know, collection of data over, you know, an extended period of time, the organisation managing the system has identified that this is typically a time where there's large traffic flow, and therefore they turn the lights on, right, and stop you. The fact that there's no traffic flow on a particular day means nothing to them because it's a large, you know, it's being managed on the basis of large sample size over and over again. So my point being that things like big databases and large samples are being used by organisations across most industries to just try and get that edge and try and change the way that they're thinking about and managing the people and processes that they're involved with. Also, e-commerce, I've put some notes there. The point being that there's a number of developments that have occurred in recent years and are continuing to occur, emphasising the need for a broader base of information than perhaps we had realised to now. There's more emphasis on risk than we've known to now. Things like financial risk, operational risk, business risk. So operational risk, the risk of less than we imagined from our performance, if you like. Business risk, the risk of things going bad for us. Strategic risk, the risk that we go down a wrong direction in our organisation. Where the way that accounting information would come into risk management will give you a range of potential outcomes, if you like. So what's the worst case scenario? What's the best case scenario? So more and more kind of senior executive leadership teams and boards of directors, etc., want a kind of a number of different scenarios, and they can make a judgment as to which is the most or least likely to occur. Ever-present emphasis on thinking about different ways of measuring performance. Right, in your subsequent studies in accounting, you look at things like the balanced scorecard and values-based management and activity-based management. Enough to say that organisations are looking at more than just financial performance, looking backwards, financial performance to manage their organisations. There are leading and lagging indicators of performance, right? There are multiple dimensions. What things do you have to get right in order to maximise your chances of delivering a positive financial result? And that's where tools like the balanced scorecard can come into it. How do you, many of us have heard a CEO or an executive stand up and say, oh, our reason for existence is to create value. Right? And we know that when we're a listed company, we know we've created value when our share price goes up. Right? So number of shares on offer multiplied by share price gives you your market capitalisation. And if the market cap at the end is greater than the market cap at the start, you beauty. Tick, create value. But how do you replicate that within the firm? What about if you're not listed? Right? That's where values-based management comes in. Right? You can read a little bit more about that. You won't. I'm not going to harp on that too much, other than to say it's a way of trying to replicate whether your behaviour is consistent with increasing your share price at the organisational level. That's the kind of role. The other activities-based management is just an approach to management that relies on you looking really hard about what's actually driving the cost, the sort of fundamental activities and processes that are actually driving your cost to be incurred. So it's a more informed approach to cost management. A number of other sort of emphasis in recent years. I just want to talk about this one just a little bit, and then we've finished the first part of the session. So I guess more so than I can remember, there's an emphasis on organisations to be more sustainable, socially and environmentally sustainable. So managers are now having to draw in an even broader type of information into their decision making. Now, the difficulty with this is that this doesn't always translate into dollars in the short term. All right? So when you're managing an organisation, you get longer term, effect on the environment, effect on society, etc. And the cause and effect is not that sharp. I mean, when you sell something, you get dollars in, or it costs you to buy something. It's a really sharp and immediate understanding of the implications of your decision. But if you're emitting carbon, or if your results are polluting the local waterways, or your organisation has left a particular town and you've caused a lot of unemployment, or whatever the case may be, the direct social and environmental results of your activities aren't generally known in the current period when the financial results are known. So it's difficult. A lot of organisations are spending a lot of money to try and understand the sustainability of their operations. And so a lot of organisations now have got sustainability teams or sustainability people in the reporting team. And quite often the sustainability report is handled at least primarily by the same group that handles the annual report to get them to try and talk to each other, the reports and the people. So hopefully that gives you some idea as to the sort of current developments in the field of business and field of business that are causing a greater demand for more broad types of information than ever before. I might press on. So there's a second part. I might press on, and if it feels like we're picking up time, we might have a little break. But there's a little bit to get through in the second part. All right. So again, changing tack slightly now to drill down a little bit on a more specific tool that we can use in accounting to help managers make decisions. So far it's been about the need for more, a broader set of information, etc. But what's an example of a specific tool that we can use? Okay? And one tool that I want to talk to you about now is cost, volume, profit analysis. Cost, volume, profit. So put simply, this tool involves decision making based on the relationship between costs and volume of production and profit. Sounds pretty simple, huh? Okay. So 3 goals, each of which are important. Distinguish between variable, fixed and mixed costs. Okay? That's going to be the simple one. 2 and 3 are going to be slightly more difficult, but there's a narrative that goes along with it that I'll share with you as well. All right, so the idea is develop your thinking or your ability to use a fairly simple technique in a range of scenarios to help figure out to provide an input into decisions, if you like. All right. So where do we start? Well, we start with cost behaviour. So just building a little bit on the conversation we were having in the first part, cost behaviour analysis involves just coming to understand how your costs behave when activity levels change. Okay? Some costs will change, some costs will stay the same. And if you understand that, you'll be able to judge really carefully or in a far more sophisticated manner what happens at different levels of production, if you like, or activity. Okay? So that's the first point. So variable costs. Variable costs change in total when volume increases or activity increases. So any direct cost is a variable cost. The more chairs we produce, the more materials we use. If we use people to make the chairs, then the more costs we're going to incur. Okay? Think about, within a certain range of activity, the variable cost per unit will stay the same. So in other words, if we're making these screens and we can buy the parts for the screens for $100 and we can sell the screens for $300. If we make 2 screens, the inference is that it's going to cost us $200. If we make 3 screens, $300. Right? Each screen we make, price goes up, or the cost goes up in total. Each screen we make, the cost per screen stays the same. Variable costs. Okay? And you can think about them as something as looking like this. Okay, so you know it's variable because when there's no activity, there's no cost. Right? Straight line. Pretty simplistic at the moment. I'm going to build on that in a minute. So, cost of sales, sales commission. What about a lecture? Variable cost of a lecture. Is there a variable cost or not? What do you think? Let's ponder it. What about electricity? Absolutely. All right. Where there is a depreciation based on units of production for the technology, that'd be a variable cost. The more we use, the more we depreciate. If I handed out materials, that'd be a variable cost. What else? Anything else? Okay. What about fixed costs? Fixed costs. Fixed costs don't change when productivity increases. So if you've got someone that works for you on a wage and there's a little bit of overtime to be done, get them to do it. You can't do it, I suppose, but they're the lowest cost, right? The more they work, if they get paid a fixed amount, you see this in hospitality all the time. If you've got casual staff and you've got a wage and salary earner and they're all meant to finish at the same time and it's not busy, the boss will come around and he won't be telling the permanent staff member to go home, right? Because their cost is fixed. He'll be telling the casual staff member to go home. And many of you, have probably at least spent some of your life as casual staff member. I know I certainly have. Fixed cost, though, will look something like this. Total fixed cost stays the same. The more you produce, the less per unit the fixed costs become. What about the fixed cost of a lecture? Any ideas? Do you think there is a fixed cost associated with a lecture? Yours? Yes. I won't go any further. I'll just say I was giving a first year lecture a few years ago, and I was just kind of flapping my arms, and I said, what about a lecture? What about a fixed cost of a lecture? And this guy said, what about you? And I said, yeah, I don't do this for free. And he said, yeah, but you should. What's your idea, young man? But you're right. I mean, if I was a casual staff member and some of your workshop leaders, some of the workshop leaders you have for others, for some of your subjects will be casual. So the more they teach, the more they get paid. Okay? People like me teach a lot and don't get paid. No, I'm kidding. Don't feel too sorry for me. I know you won't. Okay? Rent, insurance, salaries and wages. In reality, what I'm doing, though, is I'm defining these with respect to a relevant range. So this is a kind of an intuition, a key point to kind of absorb. So obviously the fixed costs and the variable costs will stay variable and fixed with respect to a range of performance or a range of activity. Okay? Where that range changes. So let's think about it in terms of, it's probably easy to think about it in terms of maybe like a bakery or something like that. So the fixed cost would be the ovens and the infrastructure and the cabinets and things like that. So we could, I don't know what the capacity of an oven is, but let's say we've got one smashing out the pies all day and we've got one smashing out bread all day. All right? Obviously, there's an optimal level of performance or a maximum level of performance and output we can get from those ovens. Okay? So we can say fixed costs, right, will stay the same. They cost us $10,000 an oven, whatever they cost, and we can produce 1 million pies. I don't know, that's silly. 300 pies and 300 loaves of bread. What happens if we needed to do more than that? Well, if we needed to do more than that, we've got to buy another oven. Okay? So the relationships that we were talking about before, the $500 in this case, will stay the same until we reach the limits of our relevant range. So the cost behaviours will be defined with respect to a range of activity. In this case, no, we haven't said what it is. So even if this is, insurance or something like that, I mean, if we get to the end of our relevant range and we want to produce more, then we're going to need to buy another factory, or we're going to need to insure it again. So that particular line will go up a notch. Okay. In relation to the activity level here, if we get people to work after hours and we have to pay them a higher hourly rate, that'd make the slope of the curve higher or steeper, if you like. All right, so relevant range, a little bit ethereal or a little bit abstract, the concept. The other thing I wanted to point out to you before we get into the kind of cost, volume, profit calculations is the idea of mixed cost or semi-variable cost. Okay, so not all costs will fit neatly into fixed or variable, and some might be a bit of both. So your electricity or your mobile phone charges or your mobile phone account is a good example. So many of you, not all of you, but many of you will pay a monthly amount, and you'll get extra charges over and above that monthly amount depending on your usage. Okay, in a business setting, security, IT, and they're commonly thought of as mixed cost or semi-variable costs. So the departments in the faculty, for example, will be charged a cost of subsidising the IT support, for example. If you call them out to work on your IT within your department, they will charge you. So that's an example of a mixed cost. Right? Same thing with security. If you get security detail to monitor an alarm on your premises, on your business premises, you'll pay a regular fee, but if you call them out to inspect, if your alarm goes off, can you go out and check it, they will charge you for it. Mixed costs look like that. All right, so it's important in doing what we're doing, and certainly in doing what I'm about to show you, it's important to be able to identify how costs behave when different levels of activity change. Okay? Other ways of thinking about costs that we will use include things like controllable and uncontrollable and relevant costs and revenues. So let me talk just a little bit about that, and I've got opportunity in sunk costs, and then we get into CVP, because all of that becomes relevant. So if you're assigning accountability to someone for their cost, for behaviour of cost or volume or profit, it depends on whether they're controllable or uncontrollable. Right, so if something happened that's pardon me, beyond your control, is it appropriate for you to be held accountable for that occurring if it's truly beyond your control? And I'd suggest it's probably not. So an example might be that if you had a budget overrun and there were others other than you that were able to charge amounts to your particular account, which is common, right, then that's uncontrollable by you. If you had set up a budget for a project and there was a national wage claim, and people who are working for you, and you couldn't have foreseen it, people who are working for you now are required to be paid $15 a week more, and no one had foreseen that occurring, that's an uncontrollable factor or an uncontrollable event that has caused you to have a budget overrun. However, if it is controllable, you have decision-making power about incurring costs or generating revenues, etc., whatever the case may be, then it's a more appropriate and easy job to assign accountability for a result. So it's handy to think about controllable and uncontrollable. It's also handy to think about what costs are relevant and what revenues are relevant. So rather than recalculate, and we're going to look at an example of this in a minute, but rather than think about what total revenues and costs change as a result of a special order or not, or a specific decision, focus only on what does change. So you don't have to calculate everything from the beginning. Right? So if you only focus on those cost items that do change as a result of the decision, you sharpen up your ability to be able to judge whether the decision's right. Opportunity cost, often overlooked in decisions. Right? So the opportunity cost, so the benefits of the next best alternative that you could have undertaken instead of doing whatever you're doing. So if you make a decision to pull someone off a particular job and put them on another job, right, you figure out what benefits you can get from them having to do this other job, but think about what you're losing by not having them do what they were doing in the first place. Okay? Opportunity cost is a powerful thing to consider. Made more, I guess, clear when you're talking about moving resources around in an organisation. So if the resources like people, were used to produce something that was saleable and you might be able to generate a profit from it. If you take them off that job and get them to do something else, then you're foregoing the profit that they were earning. And sunk costs. Sunk costs are a funny one because they've already been undertaken. So if they've already been undertaken, then they're not relevant to any decision. So, for example, quite an often cited one in recent years is the Victorian government and their payment of many millions of dollars in developing the new fast rail or redoing the rail network, right? And there was it got to a point where we've spent several hundred millions of dollars so far in doing it, we need to finish it. What? That's a definition of a sunk cost. Whatever you've spent already isn't relevant in determining whether you should spend more. Okay? It's the cost and benefits of spending that. If you can spend a little bit more and you'll reach your goal and you'll be able to generate benefits that exceed that extra expenditure, then it's worth it. But whatever you've spent is irrelevant. So another way of thinking about it on a more micro level is whether you're going to drive or take a train to work, to uni or to work tomorrow. Oh, hang on, I need to drive because I bought a weekly ticket. I need to come on the train because I bought a monthly ticket. Whether you've got a monthly ticket or not is irrelevant. It's all the sharper basis for making the decision is whether or not you get more utility tomorrow from driving or not. Okay? So sunk costs. All right. So let's get into it. So CVP, cost volume profit. So what I want to do is I want to show you the CVP technique. It's relatively simple and we'll have a bit of a play around and it should take us about half an hour and then I reckon we're done. Okay? So I'm happy to plough through if you guys are happy. If you beat the door down and say you want a 5-minute break, you can have that as well. Or you can have that instead. All right. So CVP, and now we examine the effect of changes in the cost and volume on an entity's profit. So we can use this in a number of different ways: planning, setting prices, determining product mix, responding to customer competition activity, setting prices, I've said, making a whole bunch of decisions. Okay? In order for this to occur, we need to make 5 or so standard assumptions. Okay? We can identify, so 1 and 2 really relate to whether we can identify all costs as being either variable or fixed. If they're mixed, that's okay, but as long as we can identify which parts are variable and which parts are mixed. Okay? Costs are affected only by changes in activity. And all units produced are sold. So there's no great changes in inventory levels, for example, and that kind of makes sense, right? Because most of the inventory we produce it in order to sell it. Okay? Now, the reason we make those decisions is, as you'll see in a minute, the reason we make those decisions is that revenue is driven by sales and costs are driven by production. So when we're talking about levels, if we don't assume that production and sales are about even, then the relationship between sales and profit and volume and costs changes. Okay? And if we've got a sales mix, it's roughly constant. So if all of those are in place, we're ready to go. Okay? So let's see what it looks like. So far what we've talked about is we've talked about breaking our cost into variable and fixed components, right? So if I said to you that sales revenue minus variable costs minus fixed costs equals profit, you probably go, all right, get on with it. All right, so one way of saying that is that sales minus variable costs equals contribution margin. So contribution margin, think about contribution margin is what are we making from every unit of sale that we can use to put towards our fixed costs. Okay, so your fixed costs are your overheads and your salaries and your insurances and your rent and things like that. So you need to make You need to make as much as you can, or you need to make a contribution margin from selling this document camera to enable you to pay for your overheads. All right? That's contribution margin. Taking that a little bit further, at the organisational level or at the product level, let's go with the firm or the organisational level. Total contribution margin minus fixed costs will be profit. So if your contribution margin is greater than your fixed cost, you earn a profit. All right so far? All right. So if contribution margin equals sales revenue minus variable costs, and contribution margin minus fixed costs gives you profit or loss, then when contribution margin is greater than fixed costs, you earn a profit. And contribution margin is less than fixed costs, you earn a loss. That should be an arrow. It looks like that's an equal to, greater than or equal to sign. That should be just an arrow, right? Meaning when contribution margin is less than fixed costs, you earn a loss. Okay? All right. So, how do we use this? Well, one way we use this is to, one setting that this comes in handy is in calculating a break-even point. So when you're first starting, or when you're releasing a new product, or you're trying to break into a new state or area, etc., it's handy to know how many units you need to break even. Okay? A couple of different ways of calculating. Break-even sales is the point at which your variable cost and your fixed costs equal sales. Okay? It's the point at which you earn zero profit or loss. Now, that might not always work. So, in other words, you might get a portional, it might not always work that you can calculate an exact break even. So it's the number of sales you make that your fixed and variable costs are covered. Right? And there's a slight distinction there, which I'll come back to. All right, so let me set up an example for you. Selling price, $100. Product costs, labour costs, insurance, etc., etc. And we've got a bunch of questions there. So let me set up a few things. So sales revenue per unit, and let's assume that we expect to sell 1,500 units. Okay? Variable cost per unit, based on this information, is 40. 35 plus 5. Every unit we produce and sell, it costs $40. Fixed costs, they're not per unit, they're per year. Insurance and advertising, $60,000. Okay, so here we go. Fixed costs. So what is the break-even point? So if I can draw your eyes down to here first, and we'll come back up there. Right. So fixed cost equals $60,000. Variable cost per unit is 40, and selling price per unit is 100. So if you think about it, for every unit you sell, you've got $60 left over to pay for your fixed cost. Okay? 60,000 fixed cost divided by 60 gives you 1,000 units. You need to sell 1,000 units to break even. Why? Because for every unit you sell, you've got $60. You make $60 that you can put towards paying your fixed costs. And you break even when your fixed cost equals, when your total contribution margin equals your fixed cost. Now, if that happened to be 1,000.01 units, in other words, if your fixed cost was $61,000, then you break even, well, not 61, but let's say it was $60,050, right? Your break-even point would be $1,001 because you can't sell 1,000.8 units. Okay? So there's a couple of different ways to work this out. If you're asked we might ask you to give the break-even point in sales dollars, or we might ask you to give the break-even point in sales units. Just understand what you're doing. If it's asking you for sales dollars, then simply multiply that 1,000 by the sales price. It gives you $100,000. Okay? Margin of safety, you can also calculate. So, particularly if you're breaking into a new field, what's the margin of safety? So you work out what you expect to sell and work out how far away you are from your break-even point, and that tells you something about the risk you face. All right, so for example, in this case, we expect to sell 1,500 units. We've just figured out that our break-even point is 1,000. So therefore, we've got a fair bit of coverage, right? So we've got about 33% coverage. Our expected sales can drop by 500 units or 33% before we reach our break-even point. That's a way of thinking about it. So we might compare doing that with another option, and we can start to understand our relative risk involved with pursuing the two strategies. Target net profit. So then it becomes so they're probably your break-even point is your core calculation. Then a variation of your break-even point is target net profit. Not many of us will be able to simply be happy with break-even unless we're trying to break into a new market or something like that. More to the point, what's probably more typical is that you're setting up a target profit. So how many units would you need to sell in order to generate a specified target profit? You've got to feed the kids, you've got to send them to school, you've got to do whatever you do, pay for your holiday in Chile, whatever it is, right? So all you're doing is you're adding your target profit to your break-even calculation. So that's so that bit there is your break-even calculation. All we're doing is you're adding your target profit. All right? We can also use CVP to understand planning. So what-if analysis. All right? So what happens if something changes with revenues and costs? What happens if, can we discount our price? What happens if we invest in fixed costs and we know about, some sort of change in variable costs or some sort of change in price? What will our profitability be under different levels of activity? We can answer all of those with CVP. So what if selling prices decrease by 10%, for example, holding everything else constant? So fixed costs stay the same, contribution margin goes down to 50 because selling prices come down to 90. 90 minus 40 gives you 50. 60,000 divided by 50 gives you 1,200 units. That kind of makes sense, right? Because instead of 1,000 units to break even now, we've got to sell 1,200 units because we're getting $10 less for every unit we sell. Okay? So if you then factor in your desired level of profit, 60 plus 27,000 desired level of profit, if you're making $50 from every sale, that gives you 1,740 units. Now you're starting to get somewhere, right? 1,740 units, 52 weeks a year, 2 weeks holiday, 50 weeks a year. We're all of a sudden looking at 300 units a week. Is that relevant? Is that feasible? That's the kind of process you go through. Right? It's all right if we're selling footballs. They might be for $100, but it's no good if we're selling cars. Are we going to be able to sell 300 units a week? It's a silly example, right? But, what about special orders, or what about special decisions? And this is where I was talking about before, only focusing on the relevant costs and revenues. What if we increased advertising expenditure by 10 grand, expecting to attract another 200 unit sales? So sales volume goes up by 200. Fixed cost goes up by 10,000. So the question then becomes, do we make enough extra contribution margin to cover the $10,000? In this case, 200 units multiplied by $60 a unit gives you $12,000. Additional fixed cost $10,000. Our profit goes up by $2,000. The dollar amount would suggest that it's a good decision. Then it becomes a factor as to whether we can cope with the additional demand, whether we've got any problems with quality or reliability of supply and things like that. But assuming we've got excess capacity and we can actually cope with providing the additional goods, it's going to increase our profit. So be prepared to be able to calculate things like this. Be prepared to be able to identify additional things that we need to take into account in making sure that this is a good decision. All right, and the last thing I want to show you is how to use CVP when there's more than one product. Okay? Very, very common. More than one product. All we need to know really is what ratio the products will be sold and what their specific costs and information is. So the problem being, the first slight complexity is that instead of calculating a contribution margin, we need to calculate a weighted average contribution margin. Okay? And then it stays the same. So let me set up an example. So we've got a theatre company, right? So we sell basic tickets and we sell premium tickets to a particular performance. Okay? Not unlike running an aircraft with business class and economy class and things like that, other than the fact, of course, that they're set up differently, they're manufactured differently, right? Or fitted out. So we know the product mix, we know the sales price, we know variable costs. It's all given here for us. So what do? All right. So task one, calculate individual contribution margin. So individual contribution margin, total price, selling price, minus variable costs equals contribution margin. Regular package, $21. Variable costs, everyone gets a program, $7.50. Contribution margin, $13.50. So for every regular package we sell, we get $13.50 that we can use towards paying our fixed cost. So our ticketing people and our other stuff. Premier package, there's only 15%. There's about a sixth of the, or a seventh of the total theatre that's set out. Nice comfy seats and they're cordoned off and there's, the front view and the balconies. You get 2 glasses of wine and some canapes. Right? Not unlike, it's not a million miles away, this kind of cost structure is what I'm saying. $12.50, contribution margin $17.50. So we are better off selling 1 unit of a premium package than a regular package, but we're probably constrained by way of available seating. We're also constrained by way of price because, when you go into the theatre, most people may well opt for a regular package in terms of the price point. Next step is to calculate the weighted average contribution margin. So individual contribution margins are $13.50 and $17.50 that we just calculated, then multiply them by their relevant sales mix percentage. So 15% multiplied by $17.50 gives you about $2.63 and $11.48. And you add them together and you get a weighted average contribution margin. So it's the individual contribution margin weighted by their sales mix. Okay? Then the break-even point calculation is the same. So it's the fixed cost divided by the weighted average contribution margin. So 5,213 divided by $14.11. And I think it comes to 369 point something. So we round it up to 370. Okay? So 370 is the level of tickets that we need to sell in order to cover all of our costs. Okay? Now, you need to circle that back to work out how many tickets of each. And there's a rounding, and it happens, right? But there's a rounding issue here. So if we multiply that out, I think we get 314.7 and 55 point something. Now, you can't sell 55 point something tickets or 314.7 tickets or something like that. Round it up, it doesn't matter. All I'm looking for you to do is demonstrate that you understand the need to circle it back to indicate how many tickets of each. And as long as this one, this number here, at that point you've got your total costs covered, then we're set. Okay? So the idea being that 370 tickets need to be sold in order to cover your costs. And if you cover your costs and sell 370 tickets, you're at the existing sales mix, that tells you that that's going to be about 315 tickets of one and 56 tickets of the other. That's how to think about it. So hopefully you can see that even though this is a relatively simple technique, it's pretty powerful in terms of getting your head around what the different scenarios might be if revenue, selling price or costs change, variable or fixed. It also can be used to help you figure out whether you undertake a special order. Is it worthwhile for someone to walk in and say, I'll have, 10,000 units at $70 when in fact their normal selling price is $100? If you are able to make those judgments pretty much on the spot, you'll be more valuable than ever before in your workplace. See you next week. I'll start the workshop at about 10 to 7.